Today, we're going to talk about the Belmont Report, one of the most important documents, arguably the most important document, in the field of modern bioethics. In this video, we'll talk briefly about the history of the report, define human research, and then briefly explore the core principles of the report. In our later videos, we'll delve more deeply into those concepts and their background. The Belmont Report was compiled in 1978 and published in 1979 by the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research, which we'll just call the Commission. The Commission was tasked with creating ethical principles for human research, that is, any research where humans play a role as subjects, from cutting-edge medical treatment to genetics to psychology. While the report wasn't the first document on human research, the Nuremberg trials of Nazi war criminals, for example, laid out principles for ethical research on human subjects, it was positioned at a crucial historical moment with emerging human research horizons. In the Tuskegee syphilis study, which ended shortly before the formation of the Commission, researchers tracked the progression of untreated syphilis in infected black men, but they neither told those men about their diagnosis nor its implications, and they withheld treatment for the sake of watching the disease progress. New questions were arising in fetal research, genetics, and psychology about what researchers could ethically do to their subjects in the name of science. And so, in 1974, the National Research Act created the Commission to provide expert insight into the boundaries and principles for ethical research on human subjects, from philosophers, medical doctors, psychologists, and theologians, among others. Almost everyone mentioned in this video served the Commission as a consultant and published papers in the appendix, which we'll discuss in later videos. Now, most videos will just jump right into the 3 principles of the Belmont Report right here. But we aren't most ethics classes. We're interested in moral philosophy, not just a quick set of rules. We want to know why these are the rules, not just what they are. To do that, we're going to go back to the originary question of the report. How do we define and ethically navigate research on human subjects? And why does this matter for future healthcare professionals, especially if we don't plan to do research? For most of the rest of this video, we're going to define what research even means in the context of healthcare. We can start with an easy opposition from Robert Levine. A patient is a client of a healthcare professional who will, by definition, have the patient's best interests in mind. Their goal is therapy, via treatment or cure. A research subject, on the other hand, is a subject of an experiment, a source of knowledge for a researcher. And the researcher's goal is just that, knowledge. In other words, while a doctor aims to cure their patient, strictly speaking, the patient's recovery is only a tangential aim for a researcher. This is why we can't talk about the report as trying to prevent harm to research subjects. There will be harm, whether it's psychological, incidental, or secondary effects, or even just the potential for diminished good if, for example, a trial is less successful than the standard treatment or placebo. The question is not, how do we prevent harm, but what are the reasonable ethical boundaries within which research must remain? But between research and treatment is a lot of messy middle ground. What if you're a doctor who's tried all the normally accepted therapies and your patient isn't improving? Perhaps you turn to a new experimental drug. You might not see yourself as a researcher, but now, even if your personal intent is simply to help your patient has become a research subject as well. They are providing knowledge and answers to questions as they receive their therapy. These innovative therapies are one of those middle grounds or boundary activities that might compromise your complete investment in the patient's well-being. If you can publish a case report or contribute to the research on the new therapy, then you're both a doctor and a researcher now. But wait, you might say, I'm just trying to help. I would of course make sure that my patient offers their informed consent and understands before I give them this innovative therapy. Well, Levine might say, it's true that informed consent is valuable to protect autonomy and dignity, but how truly informed is your patient? How much can they really consent of their free will? If your patient is obligated to reach out to you for assistance, and they want to get well, then won't they avail themselves of any means necessary? Especially if you tell them that you've tried to improve their condition and they're not improving, wouldn't any patient be willing to try something experimental if their condition were particularly debilitating, chronic, or terminal? That being the case, we can't simply dismiss those blurry boundaries between patient and research subject by saying the patient consented. Anytime you move outside accepted and routine practice, you are, to some degree, entering the territory of research. Well, hold on, you might counter. Some therapies doctors perform as accepted and routine practice have lost their scientific validity, but they keep doing it anyway, prescribing antibiotics for viral infections, for example. And if, as a doctor, I should also be a well-informed scientist, then shouldn't I practice intelligent, innovative medical therapies? Wouldn't I want to use the cutting edge of science? In this sense, Don Gallant, a psychiatrist, would agree with you. He argues that it would be unfortunate if rules to ensure rights and benefits became impediments to personal care and individualized therapy. But, he says, accountability is needed both ways, both for doctors who have fallen behind the boundaries of science and those who want to rush ahead. Some ethicists might take this a step further. Henry Beecher, an anesthesiologist, argues that in some sense, whenever you try out a new drug or technique, you're doing an experiment. Irving Latimer, a scholar of healthcare law, says that every time you do anything to a patient is a new context, and so, in that sense, counts as an experiment. If they're right, is all medical practice experimentation? Maybe, says Israel Golddiamond, a psychology professor. At least, it's worth acknowledging that when we offer innovative or experimental therapies as an option, we might be moving away from pure treatment by creating what he calls a critical consequence, or in other words, an outcome that's preferred in all choice situations. For a patient, of course, that critical consequence is a cure, or at least remission through treatment if no cure is yet possible. The last thing any ethical doctor would want to do is present a patient with a critical consequence. Try this experimental drug that will maybe net me a paper, a promotion, or award, or at least knowledge, or die. If we think about all medical practice as experimentation, then we might be better aware of the inequality of power in a patient-physician relationship. Acknowledging that power dynamic may encourage us to see that a contractual model between two equally consenting parties doesn't best describe how doctors and patients relate. Instead, we might gravitate toward a fiduciary model, in which one party exercises its powers in the fulfillment of a trust for the protection of the other party. That intent will ensure that even if we don't want to experiment, when we treat patients, we might make innovative departures into therapies that we're better off to remember are, to some degree, experimental. This means we should be scientific about them. We should be aware of the power imbalance that makes these consequences critical and limits choices, and recognize that we should do everything in our power to avoid coercing patients to participate in therapy. We seem to have worked ourselves into a stalemate. Doctors' sole aim should be to provide care for their patients. Researchers aim at knowledge and treat people as a means to that end. But innovative therapy feels a little like treatment and a little like experimentation. We don't want doctors to have to go through an IRB every time they want to do something that isn't in their step book, right? Says Richard Tropp, a lawyer. And we don't really want researchers to treat people purely as a means to an end, or we wind up with the Tuskegee experiments. From the healthcare side, how do we responsibly offer cutting-edge treatment? From the research side, how far are we allowed to go in the pursuit of science without violating something valuable about individuals and our society? After 4 years of debate, the Commission published their answer in the report. The whole thing is about 10 pages, built around 3 core principles: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. The first of these principles, respect for persons, centers around autonomy, or the right to act as a free, rational, self-interested individual. This, to some degree, answers Golddiamond's concerns about coercion, in that the report says that some people have less ability to exercise their autonomy than others, and so must be protected. Children, prisoners, those suffering from mental illness or dementia, to name a few. It also answers some of his concerns about contract, since it recognizes that autonomy is central to the contract model, and that if someone can't enter fully into a contract, then they need some protection through the fiduciary model. This extra care to think about power dynamics will ensure beneficence. Notice that it doesn't say risk-benefit calculations. It's easy to think of this as just a utilitarian maxim, but Albert Janssen, professor of bioethics and member of the Commission, said in an interview that the Commission made a very strong attempt to repudiate the kind of crude social utilitarianism that was frequently used to justify research that deprived human subjects of some of their rights. So, this doesn't mean that if the social benefit outweighs the cost, you can inflict harm. Quite the opposite. It means that we must always have beneficent intentions in our research, and to remember that research subjects are not merely means to an end. This helps to answer some of Levine's questions and Tropp's legal objections, in that it focuses more on intent than merely on pluses and minuses. And that goodwill leads us to the final principle, justice. This helps to answer the question of cutting-edge treatment, and also the question of how far we can go in the name of science. The answer, in part, is that it depends on whom the burdens fall, and to whom the benefits go. Research on prisoners that only benefits those who are not incarcerated, for example, does not fulfill justice, because the prisoners carry weight that they are coerced into carrying because they're vulnerable, and they do not receive any of the benefits of that care. They are, in other words, treated unequally, in a way that no reasonable person would choose for themselves if they had full autonomy. And here, we see that the principles create their own closed loop, with each one reinforcing the other. Now, how these principles play out is hardly straightforward. There are moral guides, not policies from a handbook. One way to look at them might see a meeting of deontology, utilitarianism, and virtue. Another way might see them as following Thomas Aquinas and the doctrine of double effect. Every ethicist will have a slightly different take on how these principles should play out, or even how valid or sound they are. Johnson himself said that he felt they were underdeveloped. But that's the exciting part of bioethics. We have our mandate, to protect human subjects of research while still moving the boundaries of science forward. We have our aim, to respect persons, cultivate beneficence, and spread justice. And we have our assignment that we may never finish, to investigate the nuances of these questions and principles, and to strive to make a society that is both scientific and caring.